Hello, I'm getting ready to start a new painting. It's a crow, and it's going to be a crow that's standing in some water, and the water's still, and you can see his reflection on the water. And there'll be some earthy colored pebbles visible through the water. So it's going to be in kind of muted colors, grays and muted tans, earthy colors, a little different than my usual bright colors, but I'm really excited about it. These are the colors I'm planning on using. For the crow, he'll be in a mixture of ultramarine blue with some burnt sienna and some Winsor violet and touches of lamp black, Daniel Smith's lamp black, where I want him to be really dark. I'm using that mixture instead of just black because I want some color to show on the crow. When I mix these colors together, it'll look mostly gray, but it'll be like a blue gray or a tan gray, a violet gray, with just hints of these colors coming through. And I think that'll be more interesting than just a black crow. The background's going to be a really light mix of ultramarine blue, burnt sienna, and raw sienna. My goal is to have it be kind of a softly mingled background, no real definition about what's going on in the back. And then the rocks are going to be various earth tone colors, raw sienna M. Graham, raw sienna Winsor Newton, burnt sienna Winsor Newton, brown madder Winsor Newton, sepia M. Graham. And then I'll do various mixes of these colors, like this is a raw sienna Winsor Newton with ultramarine blue, and this is ultramarine blue with burnt sienna. So anyway, that's my plan for the colors. This 26 by 26 inch painting is ready to go. I just stretched the paper, and that means I soaked it in water for 5 to 10 minutes until it was completely limp type of paper, couldn't absorb any more water, and then I stapled it to my board, and it's actually still wet. I decided I'm going to go ahead and paint the light grayish tannish background while it's wet, and then I'll let it dry and put tape on afterwards. And I'm going to use this kind of brush. This is a type of mop brush. This particular brand is a Princeton Neptune size number 6. They come in bigger sizes than this, but they hold lots of paint and water. So when I want to do big washes, this is often what I'll reach for. Not good for details, but good for big things. So what I'm planning on doing is putting kind of mingled different colors of gray, kind of a bluish gray and tannish gray, and some warmer yellow in various spots on the board. And everything is very wet. And then while it's wet, I'm going to tilt the board in various directions, which will allow gravity to allow things to kind of mingle as I tilt the board around. And I hopefully will end up with a nice smooth finish on my wash. So let's see how it goes. Okay, my background is done, and it's dried, and I've taped off the edges, as you can see. And I've also drawn my crow and his reflection on it. And you can see the background is just what I wanted. I wanted it to be to have a mingled look, especially down here at the bottom where I'm going to be putting rocks. So I wanted different colors to show through the rocks down here, and have it be a little bit more gray up at the top, a little darker up here. So I'm happy with that. I also applied masking fluid to a few areas, like around the eye and a little bit on the mouth, the water droplets, and a few places down here on the reflections, and also a couple feathers where I wanted to show the main vein or whatever it's called in the feather. So that I did that. I applied the masking fluid after I had applied the background because I didn't necessarily want those things to be white. I just wanted them to be this light gray. So when I'm painting the darker colors around it, it'll help me preserve those so I don't accidentally paint over them. So I'm happy with the way it looks. Let's see how it goes. here's my crow. I think I'm pretty happy with him, at least for now. He was kind of hard for me to do because I didn't really have a good reference photo. I just had to do a compilation of different crow photos and use my imagination. But at least for now, if I need to tune them up later, I can always do that. So next, what am I going to do? I think the next thing I'm going to do is work on maybe some of the reflections over here, the ripples in the water rather, and the drops. And then I'll probably move on to the rocks on the foreground, which I'll have to make up as well. So this painting is going to be a challenge. I'm having to make up a lot of stuff, which is less than ideal. But let's see how it goes. All right, I think I'm pretty happy with that water ripple from the drops from the crow's beak. And now I've moved on to drawing in some of the rocks that are in the foreground. This is going to be the clear part of the water where there is not a shadow. So these rocks will be more colorful than the rocks underneath the shadow of the bird. And I'm just kind of freehand drawing these, making them up as I go, trying to make the rocks in the front look a little bigger and rounder, and as they go back they get a little smaller and start to get flatter, and the spacing fades out because I don't want them extending too much past this point right here. So once again, I'm just trying to make this up, so I hope I do it okay. I'm not that good at making stuff up. I'm much better when I have a good reference photo, but I do have a vision of this painting in my mind, so I'm going to do my best to see it come to fruition. Well, I thought I would show you the process that I finally settled on for doing these rocks, these little pebbles. Wasn't quite sure how to handle it, and kind of through trial and error I've come up with a way that works. I'm sure there's a lot more efficient way that somebody that's a better painter than me could do, but I'll show you how I did it anyway. First thing I like to do is to paint the overall first color. And I'm starting with the bigger rocks first, because they take up the most room. I did a rough estimation of how many rocks there are, and I came up with 500 to 600, maybe more. Can hardly believe it, but I decided for this picture I wanted the rocks to be one of the starring features in addition to the crow, and I wanted them to be kind of interesting. So there you have it. And I guess I could have made them bigger, but too late now, I'm committed. Okay, so I've got a couple of colors here, or a couple of rocks. I'm going to add some shading and some texture to these rocks. I'm trying to make each one kind of different, but I usually do a couple that are similar to start with, just because it makes the process easier if I don't have to reinvent a new style every time I do a rock. I think on these I'm going to put a little bit of salt. Let me grab my salt. It'll give it a nice little granular texture, and I'm going to sprinkle a little bit on these. I'm only doing that on a few selected ones, but it gives it a nice grainy texture. Yeah, I gotta be careful not to get my fingers in the wet paint. Fortunately, it's a warm day right now, so my paint will dry pretty quick. And of course, if I wanted to, I could use a hairdryer. But the areas I put salt do best just drying naturally on their own. The hairdryer won't allow the salt to do its thing. Okay, there's a purple one. I'm going to add some darkness to it. This is Windsor Violet Purple, and I'm putting a dark mix of ultramarine blue and burnt sienna on it, and that creates kind of a nice granulation effect. So you might ask, why go to all this trouble with some rocks? Why not just paint the whole thing one color and do some splatters and kind of some pretend texture, instead of going to all the trouble of doing each of these rocks in such detail? Oops, not getting quite thick enough here. And the reason is that I wanted the rocks to be part of one of the stars to this picture, in addition to the crow. I wanted it to kind of catch your attention, so it didn't just look like a blah little foreground. So that was a good strategy or not? Unfortunately, I have to paint everything to find that out. Another couple purple rocks. Now adding some of that bluish brown mix of ultramarine blue and burnt sienna. Okay, let's see, let's do another type of rock. How about some gray rocks? This might be a good spot for blue-gray rock. And I'll do another one, maybe right here. There we go. So I have a mixture of big and little rocks, just for interest. I need to add a little color to that, so I think what I'm going to do is pop in a little bit of some yellow dots. It'll make it look kind of like lichen is growing on top of these rocks. Gives a little textured look. Let's see. I could do a couple at a time. It's so warm though right now that I don't want to do more than that because my rocks will dry out before I can add whatever other colors or textures I want. If it was a little cooler, I could probably do 5 or 6 rocks at a time. Just kind of space them out. I need to get a little bit more shading down the bottom. I'm going to add some kind of blacker speckles down here before this completely dries. This one's a little bit dry already, but let's see if I can't push it just a little bit. There we go. I'll be adding more shading later in the process, but I just want to get a little hint of shading in this first layer. Okay, that looks pretty good. All right, now I'm going to do a special kind of rock. It's kind of fun. Let's see, which one shall I do it on? Is that dry enough? I think I'll do one right here. I'm going to put an undercoat of just yellow, and I'm going to let it totally dry. And then I'm going to draw a little zigzaggy design on it. And I'm going to negatively paint over that yellow and around the zigzag so that it turns into kind of a rusty red stone with yellow zigzags. Maybe I'll do another one up here. This would be a good one. Okay, I'm going to blow it with a blow dryer and then we'll come back to it. All right, these 3 yellow stones that I just painted are dry. So I'm going to just do kind of a random little line, thin little line that waves all over the place. Another one right here. Okay, then I'm going to take some, this is a type of red called brown madder, M-A-D-D-E-R. It's kind of a rusty red. And I'm going to paint around the outside of those zigzags, those yellow zigzags, leaving a little yellow line. This is called negative painting. And you paint around the outside of it, or outside of something to make it appear. I'm trying to make the yellow line thicker in some areas, thinner in other areas. I left a couple unpainted spots right there just for interest. But I want to try to vary this as much as possible. I might even make this yellow line disappear in a few places totally. The idea is you don't want it to be too predictable. You don't want everything to look exactly the same. Because, of course, in nature, it's never the same. Okay, I think on the bottom of this, I'm going to add some shading with, oops, that's a little too thick. Some shading with some sepia. Oops, still too thick. There we go. Go over a little bit of those lines where they're in the shade. I'm kind of dabbing at it to enhance the feeling of some texture in the rock. I mean, some of these rocks are smooth, but not all of them. Okay, everything's going to dry lighter than I have here, so I think that'll be good. Now let's do the next one. We'll do this one, and let's make our little jagged line. We'll make this one go diagonally just because I'll just put one. Okay, here we go. And notice how the line, I made it so it didn't have straight edges. Just kind of wanders all over the place. So I'm doing this part wet on dry because I wanted to have complete control over where the paint goes. But when I was doing these other rocks, I was doing them wet on wet because I wanted everything to mingle really softly. And I just controlled how far they mingled by how thick the paint was that I added. You know, like for instance, these drops of yellow were thicker than the underlying gray blue was. So they spread a little bit, but they didn't cover the whole thing. So I was able to control the amount of water on both paper and on my brush. Okay, now adding some little bit of shading using that sepia. Maybe I'll make that a couple little dots up here. Part of the thing that's tiring about doing rocks is having to make up each one. Each one is its own little thing. And that of course can be a lot of fun and also just a little bit tiring, especially when you're doing it 500 times. Now I'm going to dry this with a hair dryer and then show you the next step. Now I have a cluster of rocks painted in different colors with different textures. The next thing I'm going to do is lift a little bit of paint to give them a little bit more of a highlight look. Some of them I've already done, like that one's already been done and these have been done. And all that entails is taking a brush. You can use a chisel blender, or in this case I'm using just a little number 2 brush, and I'm just putting some water on using a wet brush, and I'm just lightly kind of scrubbing where I want the paint to loosen up. Then I'm using a paper towel to pick it up. And see how that gives a nice light edge to those rocks and makes them look just a little bit more rounded. Just a warning that if you're doing something that has 500 rocks like this is, you're probably going to wear out your brush that you're doing lifting with. This is a Princeton Aqua Elite synthetic brush, and I like them in general anyway, but they're also inexpensive, so if I do abuse my brush, I don't feel too bad about having to get another one. And most of the time my brushes last a long time, but doing this can be kind of hard on the tip, and you eventually lose that nice pointed tip when you're scrubbing or lifting. Now you could have just carefully included the highlights as you painted this first layer. That would have been excellent. But for the most part, I'm finding it quicker just to lift them off afterwards. And because I'm using colors, for the most part, these colors are pretty easy to lift. It's not hard. The purple, Windsor purple, is not as easy to lift, but you know, all the raw siennas, the burnt sienna, the ultramarine blues, the brown madder, those are all easy to lift. All the earth colors are easy to lift. See? Getting some nice little, makes it look like there's rounded stones. So I have a shadow on one side and a highlight on the other. So even though these are, I'm hoping they'll have the illusion that these will be underwater, I still want them to have highlights because the light is shining through the water, and these rocks will have a 3-dimensionality to them in order to look believable. I'm hoping that when I'm done with this, that this will look like pebbles under the surface of the water. Further up near the crow, I have some ripples, and I hope that will be enough of a trick, I guess, to trick your eye into thinking that the rest of this is underneath water. But it would be very clear water because you'll be able to see the pebbles very clearly. So we'll see. Never tried anything like this before, and I just hope it works. All right, I finished a little bit and I just wanted to show you. Here's a section that has the background in right through here. So the rocks, you can see there's shadows and a sense of depth in between them. It just makes them pop a little bit. Now if you compare that to this section, I mean, these definitely still pop a little bit because I have shadows and highlights on individual rocks. But there's these kind of weird little white gaps in between, and they just don't have quite as much depth as these do with the darker shadows. So that's what I'm going to do. And let's keep going with our time lapse. All right, I think I have finished filling in the pebbles on both sides. You can see the pebbles in the front are more colorful and detailed, and as they go back further in the water, the detail disappears and the color gets lighter until finally you don't see them at all because of the light reflecting off the surface of the water. I think I'm going to add another little wave maybe in this area, and I'm going to do that just by using a wet brush and lifting some paint, and that will help reinforce the idea that these pebbles are underwater as well. I don't want to overdo it, but I do want to get at least some sense of water movement, which will help really make this seem like it's a shallow little puddle that this crow is standing in. So it's just I'm just using a wet brush and then a paper towel to dab it up. I'm going to kind of play with where I want it first. I think maybe through there. I think I'm going to use my Princeton Chisel Blender number 2 to help lift just a little bit more paint than that. Now that I have an idea of where I want my wave to be. Don't want to lift too much because I don't want a really hard-edged wave in here. I want it just to be a hint of a wave. And as I get closer to the edge, I want it to thin out a little bit, come to a point, like a real wave would do. Maybe a little brighter right in the middle of it. I'm trying to do this very gradually and keep it fairly subtle. This tends to be a one-way street when you're lifting paint. If you lift too much and you try to add some back, you can do that, but it never quite looks as good. So better to just lift a little bit at a time until you get kind of that look you're hoping for. There, I like that better. how's that? So I think what I still don't quite like completely is the bottom of this crow. I think I want to put just a little bit more shading on the bottom to give him just a little bit more of a 3D look through here. So let me try that. I always get a little nervous about doing those last things, afraid I'm gonna mess it up. But I think it'll be worth it. So here goes. Okay, here's how it turned out. I'm very happy with it. It's obviously different than what I normally do, but it just gives me kind of a peaceful feeling when I look at this. I really like the effect of the reflection and the ripples and seeing the little colorful pebbles through the water. I hope you enjoyed watching how I painted this crow. I always learn something new every time I try something like this, and I have a lot of fun with it. So keep painting, and I'll see you another day. Bye-bye.